The servants' corridor was never meant for the daughter of a viscount. Yet here, Veratus Ashford, crouched in the shadows, pressing herself against the cold stone wall, listening to the women who had stolen her life discuss how to destroy what little remained of it. The beggar from the church steps, her stepmother's voice drifted through the cracked door of the morning room. The blind one. He'll do perfectly. Veratus stopped breathing. Honoria, surely you cannot be serious. That was Lady Pemberton, her stepmother's closest confidant and fellow schemer. Marrying the girl to a street beggar? Even for you, that seems excessive. Excessive? Honoria Ashford laughed, a sound like crystal shattering. The girl has been a thorn in my side for 7 years, living in this house as though she still belongs here, looking at me with those accusing eyes, reminding my husband of his precious first wife every time he sees her face. Veratus pressed her hand over her mouth to stifle the sob building in her throat. But a beggar, Honoria, what will society say? Society will say that Veratus Ashford, desperate and ruined after her father's illness, depleted the family coffers, married beneath her station in a fit of madness. They'll pity us for having such an unstable stepdaughter. And more importantly, Honoria's voice dropped to a satisfied purr. She'll be out of this house forever. No claim to her father's estate. No inheritance. Nothing but a blind husband who can't work, and a lifetime of poverty stretching before her. And Lord Ashford? Surely he won't permit this. My husband hasn't left his bed in 3 months. The physician says he has weeks at most. By the time he's gone, the marriage will already be done. Legal. Unbreakable. Veratus's knees threatened to buckle. Her father was dying. She'd known he was ill, had begged to see him daily, but Honoria had refused her access. He needs rest, she'd said. Your presence upsets him. Lies. All of it lies. The beggar, Lady Pemberton mused. How do you even know he'll agree? I've already spoken with him, offered him £50 and a roof over his head. For a man who sleeps in alleyways and eats scraps, it's a fortune. He accepted immediately. Does the girl know? She'll know tomorrow morning when I inform her the wedding is at noon. The vicar at St. Dunstan's owes me a favor. No banns, no waiting period. Just a quick ceremony, and then she's someone else's problem forever. Veratus heard the clink of teacups, the rustle of silk as the women settled more comfortably into their chairs. They were discussing her destruction with the same casual ease they might use to plan a garden party. What about Fenella? Lady Pemberton asked. Won't she object to her stepsister being treated so harshly? Honoria scoffed. My daughter understands the importance of removing obstacles. Veratus has been an obstacle since the day I married her father. That pale, serious face. Those ridiculous books she's always reading. The way the servants still treat her like the lady of the house when everyone knows that position belongs to me. She is rather lovely, though. Couldn't you simply marry her off to some minor gentleman? A curate, perhaps, or a naval officer shipping out to sea? And give her a chance at happiness, a respectable life? Honoria's voice hardened. Absolutely not. I want her to suffer Marion. I want her to wake every morning knowing that she was brought so low that a blind beggar was the best she could do. I want her to remember, for the rest of her miserable existence, that she should never have looked at me like I wasn't worthy of her father's love. Veratus couldn't listen to any more. She retreated down the servants' corridor on silent feet, years of practice helping her avoid the creaking floorboards. She'd learned to be invisible in this house, to take her meals in the kitchen when Honoria entertained, to wear her dead mother's altered gowns because no new ones were ever purchased for her, to exist in the margins of her own home like a ghost who hadn't yet realized she was dead. But this was beyond anything she'd imagined. A blind beggar. Tomorrow. Noon. She reached her small room at the back of the house, the room that had once been meant for a governess, and sank onto the narrow bed. Her hands were shaking. She could run, pack a small bag, and flee into the night. But where would she go? She had no money, no relatives who would take her in, no friends left after years of Honoria systematically isolating her from society. And if she ran, she would never see her father again. Never have a chance to say goodbye. The trap was perfect. Honoria had spent 7 years building it, and tomorrow it would snap shut. Viratis looked around her tiny room, at the faded watercolor of her mother on the wall, at the worn book stacked beside her bed, at the single candle guttering on the windowsill. Tomorrow she would become a beggar's wife, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Sleep never came. Viratis lay awake through the long hours of the night, watching shadows crawl across the ceiling, trying to find some escape from the fate bearing down on her like a runaway carriage. She could appeal to her father. But how? Honoria had barred her from his sick room for months. The one time she'd tried to force her way in, Honoria had threatened to call the constable and have her committed to an asylum. Hysteria, she'd said with that thin smile. Such a shame when young women lose their minds. She could refuse to speak the vows, but she'd seen women dragged through forced marriages before. The church didn't require enthusiasm, only words, and Honoria would have someone there to ensure those words were spoken, even if Viratis's voice broke on every syllable. She could throw herself on the mercy of the vicar. But Honoria had said he owed her a favor. Whatever debt he carried, it was apparently worth more than one young woman's future. Dawn broke gray and cold, seeping through the thin curtains like a premonition. Viratis rose and dressed in the only decent gown she had left, a faded blue muslin that had belonged to her mother. If she was going to be humiliated, she would at least wear something that reminded her of who she really was. Viratis Ashford, daughter of Emmeline Ashford, who had been kind and clever and beloved by everyone who knew her. Not the unwanted stepdaughter Honoria had tried to make her. The summons came at 10 o'clock. A maid Viratis didn't recognize, one of Honoria's new hires, knocked on her door with a face carefully blank. "The mistress wants you in the drawing room, miss." Viratis followed her down the familiar hallways of the house that should have been hers, past the portrait gallery, where her mother's painting had been removed and replaced with one of Honoria, past her father's study, now kept locked, past all the memories of her childhood, preserved in architecture, but erased in every other way. Honoria waited in the drawing room, dressed in her finest morning gown as though this were a celebration. "Ah, Viratis." She didn't rise. "I have wonderful news. I've arranged a marriage for you." Viratis stood very still. "Have you?" "A man of modest circumstances, but willing to take you despite your obvious deficiencies. The ceremony is at noon. I've laid out an appropriate dress in your room. Nothing too fine, of course. We wouldn't want you to outshine your situation." Viratis met her stepmother's eyes. 7 years of cruelty. 7 years of small humiliations and large betrayals. 7 years of watching this woman poison her father against her, steal her inheritance piece by piece, and reduce her from the daughter of the house to barely more than a servant. "And if I refuse?" Honoria's smile widened. "Then I'll have you declared mentally unfit, committed to Bethlehem Hospital. I have physicians who will sign whatever papers I require." She examined her nails with studied casualness. "Your choice, of course. Marriage or madness. Though I hear the conditions at Bethlehem are quite unpleasant." It wasn't a choice. They both knew it. "I'll need to say goodbye to my father." "Impossible. The excitement would be too much for his fragile condition." Honoria rose, smoothing her skirts. "The carriage leaves at 11:30. I suggest you prepare yourself." She swept from the room, leaving Viratis alone with the ruins of her life. St. Dunstan's was a small church on the unfashionable edge of London, the kind of place where questions weren't asked and coin spoke louder than conscience. Viratus stood in the dim vestibule, wearing a plain gray dress Honoria had selected, feeling like a prisoner being led to execution. The pews were empty, no witnesses except Honoria, Fenella, and 2 servants who would sign the register. No flowers, no music, no joy. Just cold stone and guttering candles, and the faint smell of mildew. And at the altar, a figure waiting in the shadows. Viratus's first impression was of height. The beggar was tall, taller than she'd expected, with broad shoulders beneath a threadbare coat that had perhaps once been fine. A cloth was wrapped around his eyes, stained and fraying. His dark hair was unkempt, falling across his forehead. His jaw was rough with several days' growth of beard. But his hands were wrong. Viratus noticed it as she approached the altar. Beggar's had weathered hands, cracked and calloused from sleeping rough and scraping for survival. This man's hands, though dirty, had the long fingers and maintained nails of someone who had never done hard labor in his life. The vicar cleared his throat. "Shall we begin?" "Yes. Let's not waste time on sentiment." Honoria's voice dripped with satisfaction. "The bride is eager to meet her groom. Aren't you, Viratus?" Viratus didn't answer. She was staring at the beggar, at the way he held himself despite his apparent blindness. There was no hesitation in his posture, no uncertain tilting of the head that she'd observed in other blind people she'd encountered. He stood like a man accustomed to commanding rooms, not begging in them. "Dearly beloved," the vicar began in a monotone that suggested he wanted this over as quickly as possible. The words washed over Viratus like cold water. She heard them without processing, her mind caught on the mystery standing beside her. Who was this man? What beggar stood with the posture of a soldier? What blind man turned his head toward sounds with such precision? "Do you, Viratus Emmeline Ashford, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" The church fell silent. Viratus felt Honoria's gaze burning into her back, felt the weight of the threat hanging over her. Bethlehem, the asylum, a fate worse than this strange marriage. "I do." The words tasted like ashes. "And do you, Soren, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" Soren. So the beggar had a name, an unusual one, foreign perhaps. "I do." His voice was deep and quiet, with an accent she couldn't quite place. Educated. Refined, even. Nothing like the rough speech she'd expected from a man who slept on church steps. Another wrong thing. Another piece that didn't fit. The vicar pronounced them married with visible relief. "You may kiss the bride." Viratus tensed, but the beggar, her husband, made no move toward her. Instead, he simply held out his hand, palm upward, waiting. After a moment's hesitation, she placed her fingers in his. His grip was gentle but certain, and warm. So warm that she almost gasped. He drew her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles that sent an unexpected shiver down her spine. "My wife," he murmured, so quietly that only she could hear. "I suspect this is not the wedding day you imagined." "You suspect correctly." She matched his low tone, "though I imagine it exceeds your expectations." A ghost of a smile crossed his face, there and gone so quickly she might have imagined it. "You might be surprised what I expected, my lady." My lady. What beggar used such terms? How touching! Honoria appeared beside them, her voice bright with malice. "The happy couple. Now, I've arranged for a cart to take you both to your new home, a room above a chandler's shop in Whitechapel. Modest, but suitable for your circumstances." "That won't be necessary." Everyone turned. The beggar, Soren, had straightened to his full height. And suddenly, He seemed to fill the small church, his presence expanding in a way that made Honoria take an involuntary step backward. "I have arranged our accommodations," he continued. "My wife and I will depart in my own transport." "Your transport?" Honoria laughed. What transport could a blind beggar possibly have? The church doors swung open. Viratis turned and felt her heart stop. A carriage stood in the street. Not a cart, not a hired hack, but a gleaming black carriage with gilt trim and matched gray horses. A liveried footman held the door open, revealing an interior of burgundy velvet. And on the carriage door, emblazoned in gold, was a crest she recognized from every society page she'd ever read. The crest of the Duke of Valmir. "Thank you for the ceremony," Sorin said, his hand still holding hers. "We'll see ourselves out." He led her down the aisle toward the waiting carriage, moving with perfect confidence for a man who supposedly couldn't see. Behind them, Viratis heard Honoria's strangled gasp, heard Fenella's confused questions, and heard the vicar's stammered apologies. But she couldn't process any of it. Her mind was fixed on the crest on the carriage door, on the impossible contradiction of everything she thought she knew. Sorin handed her into the carriage with courtly grace, then climbed in after her. The door closed. The carriage began to move, and Viratis found herself alone with a stranger who was very clearly not what he had seemed. "You're not blind," she said. He reached up and unwound the cloth from his eyes. Gray eyes met hers, clear and sharp and filled with an intelligence that made her breath catch. "No," he agreed. "I'm not. And you're not a beggar." Also correct. Viratis's hands were trembling. "Then what are you? Who are you?" He studied her for several heartbeats, something unreadable in his gaze. Then he inclined his head in a gesture that was almost a bow. "Sorin Blackwood, Duke of Valmir, at your service." His voice was wry, but not unkind. "And, as of 10 minutes ago, your husband." The carriage rattled on through the London streets, while Viratis struggled to comprehend how her day had gone from catastrophic to incomprehensible. She'd been forced to marry a blind beggar to humiliate her. Instead, she'd accidentally married the most powerful duke in England. And she had absolutely no idea what happened next. The carriage moved through London's crowded streets, but inside, silence reigned. Viratis sat rigid against the velvet cushions, her mind racing faster than the horse's hooves. Duke of Valmir. She knew that name. Everyone knew that name. Sorin Blackwood controlled half the shipping in England, held seats on a dozen parliamentary committees, and was rumored to have the ear of the king himself. He was also, according to every society column she'd ever read, utterly reclusive. Never attended balls. Rarely appeared in public. Some whispered he was disfigured. Others claimed he was mad. A few suggested he didn't actually exist, that the Duke of Valmir was merely a name attached to a vast fortune managed by solicitors. Yet here he sat across from her, very much real, watching her with those unnerving gray eyes. "You have questions," he said. "I have approximately 400 questions." Viratis was surprised her voice remained steady. Starting with why the Duke of Valmir was pretending to be a blind beggar on the steps of St. Dunstan's church. A fair place to begin. He leaned back, crossing his long legs. Without the hunched posture and dirty face, he was disturbingly handsome. Sharp cheekbones, a strong jaw now that she could see it properly, and those eyes that seemed to catalog everything they touched. "I was investigating a matter. The disguise allowed me access to certain information. What matter could possibly require a duke to beg for coins? That," he said quietly, "is not something I can share. Not yet." Viratis felt a flash of irritation. "You've married me under false pretenses, and you won't even explain why." The marriage was your stepmother's design, not mine. I simply chose not to correct her assumptions. A shadow passed across his face. When she approached me with her offer, I recognized an opportunity. An opportunity for what? He didn't answer immediately. The carriage turned onto a wider avenue, and Viratus caught glimpses of increasingly grand residences through the window. They were heading toward Mayfair, she realized, the wealthiest district in London. Your stepmother, Soren said finally, has been a person of interest to me for some time. When she offered me £50 to marry her stepdaughter, I was curious. Why would a viscountess go to such lengths to dispose of a young woman? What threat could you possibly pose? Viratus stared at him. You married me to investigate my stepmother? Partially. His gaze held hers. I also married you because what she intended was monstrous, and I found myself disinclined to allow it. The words hung between them. Viratus didn't know what to make of them, of him, of any of this. The carriage slowed and stopped. Through the window, Viratus saw a house that made her childhood home look like a cottage. White stone, soaring columns, windows that caught the afternoon light like diamonds. Servants in immaculate livery lined the steps. Welcome to Valmere House, Soren said. Your new home. A footman opened the carriage door. Soren descended first, then turned to offer his hand. Viratus took it, stepping down onto the gravel drive, feeling like she'd tumbled through a looking glass into someone else's life. The butler, a silver-haired man with the bearing of a general, bowed deeply. Your Grace, we were not expecting you to return with company. Change of plans, Drummond. This is Her Grace, the Duchess of Valmere. Soren's voice carried no inflection, as though announcing a duchess was an everyday occurrence. Please have Mrs. Fairchild prepare the Duchess's apartments. If Drummond was surprised, his face betrayed nothing. Of course, Your Grace. Shall I have tea sent to the drawing room? The library. Her Grace and I have matters to discuss. Viratus followed Soren through an entrance hall, larger than her entire childhood home. Marble floors, a sweeping staircase, artwork that belonged in museums. Servants appeared and vanished like ghosts, efficient and silent. The library was warm, a fire already crackling in the enormous hearth. Books lined every wall, floor to ceiling, more volumes than Viratus had ever seen outside a university. She moved toward them instinctively, fingers reaching out to touch the spines. You're welcome to read anything here. Soren's voice came from behind her. I noticed your calluses. She turned. My calluses? On your fingers, from holding books. You read frequently. More than is considered fashionable for a young lady. He'd noticed that. In the dim church, during their brief ceremony, he'd noticed the calluses on her fingers. I read constantly, she admitted. It's one of the few pleasures my stepmother couldn't take from me. His expression shifted almost imperceptibly. She took a great deal, I gather. Everything. The word came out more bitter than she'd intended. My home, my father's affection, my place in society. She spent 7 years erasing me. Today was meant to be the final stroke. Instead, you've become a duchess. Instead, I've become a stranger's wife with no understanding of why or what happens next. Soren moved to a chair by the fire, gesturing for her to take the one opposite. What happens next is complicated. We are legally married. That cannot be undone easily, if at all. Do you want it undone? He considered her for a weighted pause. Not necessarily. But you deserve honesty about what you've entered into. He paused. I'm not an easy man to know. Viratus. I have enemies. I keep secrets. My life is not the glittering social whirl most duchesses expect. I never expected to be a duchess at all. This morning I expected to live in poverty with a blind husband who couldn't work. And instead, You find yourself in luxury with a husband who works too much and sees far more than is comfortable. That ghost of a smile again. I'm not certain which fate is worse. Despite everything, Viratus felt her lips twitch. The luxury is a slight improvement. Only slight. The jury is still deliberating on the husband. He laughed, a sound of genuine amusement that softened his severe features entirely. Fair enough. Shall we establish some ground rules for this unexpected arrangement? Viratus sat straighter. Ground rules she could manage. Practical discussions were far easier than the chaos of emotions swirling through her. First, Soren said, honesty between us. Whatever secrets I keep from the world, I won't lie to you directly. I expect the same in return. Agreed. Second, you'll have complete freedom within this house. Go where you wish, read what you wish, do as you please. I won't confine you or control you. Viratus blinked. After 7 years under Honoria's thumb, the concept of freedom felt foreign. And in exchange? In exchange, I ask for patience. There are things I cannot explain yet. Matters that are delicate and dangerous. When I can tell you more, I will. And the marriage itself? She forced herself to ask the question burning in her mind. What do you expect from me as your wife? His expression remained neutral, but his gaze intensified. Nothing you're not willing to give. We are strangers who happen to share a legal bond. I suggest we use the coming weeks to determine if we might also become friends. Friends. It was more than she'd dared hope for when she'd stood in that church expecting poverty and degradation. One more thing, Soren added. Your stepmother will learn soon enough who you've actually married. When she does, she'll come calling, probably with apologies and explanations and attempts to ingratiate herself. Let her come. Viratus's voice hardened. I have nothing to say to her. Good. Soren's smile was cold. Because I have quite a lot to say, and none of it will be to her liking. 3 days later, Honoria came calling. Viratus had spent those days in a daze of luxury and confusion. Her new apartments were larger than the entire upper floor of her childhood home. A lady's maid named Parthena, a serious young woman with clever hands, had been assigned to her. New gowns had appeared in her wardrobe, ordered by Soren without her knowledge, all in colors and fabrics she would have chosen for herself. It was unnerving how well he seemed to understand her preferences without asking. They took breakfast together each morning, conversations ranging from philosophy to politics to the quality of the cook's scones. He was brilliant, she'd discovered. Widely read, sharply analytical, and possessed of a dry wit that caught her off guard. He was also careful. Every personal question he deflected, every probe into his mysterious investigation he parried. She was beginning to realize that Soren Blackwood was a man of layers, and he revealed them only when he chose. When Drummond announced Lady Ashford's arrival, Viratus was in the library reading a treatise on astronomy. Soren looked up from his correspondence with an expression that might have been anticipation. Show her to the drawing room. We'll receive her there. We? Viratus's heart hammered. Unless you prefer not to. You have no obligation to see her. No, Viratus set down her book. I want to see her face when she realizes what she's done. They entered the drawing room together. Honoria stood by the window, dressed in her finest visiting gown, her face arranged in an expression of maternal concern that made Viratus's stomach turn. Viratus, my dear child. Honoria swept forward, arms outstretched. When I learned the truth, I was beside myself with worry. To think, my beloved stepdaughter married to the Duke of Valmir without my knowledge. The shock nearly sent me to my bed. Viratus didn't move into the embrace. The shock of learning you'd accidentally elevated me instead of destroying me? Yes, that must have been difficult. Honoria's mask slipped for an instant, but she recovered quickly. Destroying you? What a terrible thing to say. I only ever wanted what was best for you, dear. This marriage, unusual as it was, proves that fate had wonderful plans. Fate had nothing to do with it. Soren's voice cut through the performance like a blade. You did, Lady Ashford. Quite deliberately. Honoria turned to him, her smile faltering slightly. Your Grace, I don't know what Viratus has told you, but surely there's been some misunderstanding. No misunderstanding. Soren moved to stand beside Viratus, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. You arranged a marriage designed to humiliate and impoverish your stepdaughter. You chose a man you believed was a blind beggar specifically because you wanted her to suffer. That's absurd. I would never— I heard you. Viratus's voice shook with years of suppressed rage. In the servants' corridor. You told Lady Pemberton you wanted me to wake every morning, knowing I'd been brought so low. You wanted me to remember that I should never have looked at you like you weren't worthy of my father's love. Honoria's face went pale, then red. You were eavesdropping, spying on private conversations. Private conversations about selling me into misery. Lady Ashford. Soren's tone had gone dangerously soft. I suggest you leave now. You are not welcome in this house, today or ever. You can't simply dismiss me. I'm her family. Her father is dying because you've kept physicians from treating him properly. Soren's words landed like blows. You've been slowly reducing his medication, extending his illness, ensuring he remains bedridden while you plunder the estate. Honoria staggered. How dare you? You have no proof. I have extensive proof. I've had investigators examining your household for weeks. He stepped closer, and Honoria retreated. The forged documents, the missing funds, the servants you've bribed to keep silent. Did you think no one would notice? This was it, Viratus realized. This was what Soren had been investigating, not some abstract matter. Her stepmother, her father's estate, the slow murder of a viscount through medical neglect. I want to see my father. The words tore from her throat. Now. Today. Arrangements are being made. Soren didn't look away from Honoria. Lord Ashford will be removed from your care and brought to a proper hospital where he can receive treatment. Whatever damage you've done, we'll attempt to reverse. You can't do this. Honoria's voice had gone shrill. I'm his wife. I have rights. You have the right to remain silent while I decide whether to involve the magistrates. Soren's smile was terrifying in its coldness. Leave, Lady Ashford. Go home and consider how you wish to spend your remaining freedom. Honoria looked between them, saw no mercy in either face, and fled. The door slammed behind her. Viratus stood trembling, years of pain and anger crashing through her in waves. Soren turned to her, his expression softening. Viratus. You knew, her voice cracked. All this time you knew what she was doing to my father. I suspected. When she approached me at the church, I realized it was worse than I'd imagined. He hesitated, then reached out to take her hands. I should have told you sooner. I was gathering evidence, trying to ensure she couldn't escape consequences. But you deserved to know. Is he really dying? He's very ill. But the physician I've consulted believes that with proper care, he might recover, at least partially. Viratus felt tears sliding down her cheeks. She hadn't allowed herself to cry in years. Crying was weakness, and weakness around Honoria was dangerous. But she wasn't around Honoria anymore. Soren pulled her closer, and she found herself leaning into him, pressing her face against his shoulder, while sobs shook her body. He held her without speaking, one hand stroking her hair, warm and solid, and unexpectedly gentle. I'm sorry, she managed eventually, pulling back. I've ruined your coat. I have other coats. His hands remained on her shoulders. Are you all right? No. She laughed shakily. But I think I might be eventually. His thumb brushed a tear from her cheek, the gesture achingly tender. We'll see your father tomorrow. I've arranged everything. Viratus looked up at this strange, complicated man who had married her for reasons she still didn't fully understand, who had quietly worked to save her father while she'd assumed the worst of him. Why? She whispered. Why did you do all this? You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. Soren was quiet for several heartbeats. Perhaps I recognized something familiar, he said finally. Someone trapped by circumstances beyond their control. Someone who deserved better than what life had given them. He released her and stepped back, the moment of intimacy closing like a door. Rest tonight. Tomorrow will be difficult. He left her standing in the drawing room, more confused than ever, because for just a moment, when he'd held her, she'd felt something she hadn't felt in 7 years. Safe. The weeks that followed were the strangest of Viratus's life. Her father was transferred to a private hospital, where physicians immediately began reversing the damage Honoria's neglect had caused. The first time Viratus visited, he'd been too weak to speak, but he'd gripped her hand with surprising strength. Tears had tracked down his weathered face. My girl, he'd whispered. My Veritas. I thought you'd abandoned me. Never, Papa. She told me you didn't want to see me, that my presence upset you. Lies. His voice cracked. All of it lies. She visited daily after that, watching him grow stronger, listening as he recounted the nightmare of the past year, how Honoria had convinced him Viratus wanted nothing to do with him, how she'd controlled his medications, his correspondence, his contact with the outside world, how he'd been a prisoner in his own bed, believing his daughter had turned against him. Soren accompanied her sometimes, sitting quietly while father and daughter reconnected. Lord Ashford had been wary of him at first, but something in Soren's quiet competence seemed to reassure him. He's a good man, your Duke, her father said one afternoon when Soren had stepped out. I can see it in how he watches over you. He's not my Duke, Papa. This marriage was an accident. Was it? Her father's eyes, clearer now than they'd been in months, studied her shrewdly. I've seen the way he looks at you, girl. That's no accident. Viratus didn't know how to respond to that. At Valmir House, she and Soren had fallen into routines that felt dangerously domestic. Breakfasts together, where they debated everything from literature to naval reform. Afternoons where she read in the library while he worked at his desk. Evenings where they dined together, their conversations stretching longer each night. She learned that he'd lost his parents young, raised by an uncle who'd valued education above all else, that he'd taken control of his estates at 19 and spent the intervening years building them into an empire, that he worked to improve conditions for those in his employ, paying fair wages, providing schools for workers' children, funding hospitals in the communities around his properties. She learned that he hated attending social events because the falseness exhausted him, that he read philosophy at night when he couldn't sleep, that he had a weakness for the cook's almond cakes, though he pretended otherwise. She learned that when he smiled, really smiled, it made him look years younger, and that she lived for those smiles more than she wanted to admit. One evening, 6 weeks into their strange marriage, Viratus found him in the library staring into the fire, a glass of whiskey untouched in his hand. What's wrong? She settled into her usual chair across from him. Your stepmother's trial date has been set. She'll face charges of fraud, theft, and attempted murder for what she did to your father. That's good news, isn't it? It is. He didn't look at her. It also means my investigation is concluded. The reason I married you no longer exists. Viratus felt something cold settle in her stomach. What are you saying? I'm saying that if you wish to pursue an annulment, I won't stand in your way. You were coerced into this marriage. You never had a real choice. If you want your freedom, I'll ensure you have it." The fire crackled. Somewhere in the house, a clock chimed the hour. "And if I don't want an annulment?" Soren finally looked at her. His expression was carefully neutral, but something burned in the depths of his eyes. "Then I would ask why? Because in 6 weeks, this house has become more of a home than anywhere I've lived since my mother died. Because you've given me freedom and respect and conversations that actually matter. Because you saved my father and destroyed my enemy, and never once made me feel like a burden or an obligation." She rose from her chair and crossed to him, standing close enough that she had to tilt her head to meet his eyes. "Because when you held me the day Honoria came, I felt safe for the first time in 7 years. And I don't want to lose that." Soren set down his glass. His hand rose to cup her face, his touch gentle despite its size. "Veratus," her name was rough in his throat. "I need you to be certain. What I feel for you, it's not casual. If you stay, if we continue this marriage, I won't be able to keep my distance. I'm not capable of half measures. Not with you. What do you feel for me?" He was quiet for a stretched silence. Then he leaned down and pressed his lips to her forehead, achingly tender. "Too much," he murmured against her skin. "Far too much for a wife who was supposed to be temporary. Then make me permanent." He pulled back to look at her, something vulnerable in his expression that she'd never seen before. "You're certain?" "I'm certain that I've felt more alive in 6 weeks with you than in 7 years before. I'm certain that when I wake up, the first thing I want is to see you at breakfast. I'm certain that losing you would break something in me that I didn't know existed until now." She reached up to touch his face, feeling the rough stubble along his jaw. "I'm certain, Soren." He kissed her, not the gentle press of lips to her forehead. This was hunger and relief and something that felt like desperation. His arms wrapped around her, pulling her close, and she melted into him, kissing him back with equal fervor. When they finally broke apart, both breathing raggedly, his forehead rested against hers. "You have no idea how long I've wanted to do that," he said. "Then why didn't you?" "Because you deserved the choice. You deserved to know you could leave if you wanted to." His hands cradled her face. "I never wanted you to feel trapped again." Veratus felt tears threatening again, but these were different. Happy tears. Tears of relief and joy, and something that felt terrifyingly like love. "I don't feel trapped," she whispered. "I feel found." They stood there in the firelight, wrapped in each other, while the world outside continued without them. Whatever came next, whatever challenges awaited, Veratus knew one thing with absolute certainty. She was never letting him go. But somewhere across London, in a cramped room above a tavern, a man unfolded a letter he'd received weeks ago. The instructions were clear. The payment was generous, and the woman who'd hired him was now in custody, which meant there was no one to call off the plan. If she was going down, she would make certain her stepdaughter went down with her. The letter arrived 3 days after their first kiss. Veratus had spent those days in a haze of happiness she'd never thought possible. Soren was attentive without being smothering, affectionate without being overwhelming. He brought her books he thought she'd enjoy. He took her for walks in the private garden behind Valmere House. He kissed her each morning at breakfast, and each evening before they retired to their separate rooms, kisses that grew longer and more heated with each passing day. But he never pushed for more. "When you're ready," he said, "not before." She was beginning to think she was very nearly ready. Then the letter came. Veratus found it on the floor of the entrance hall, apparently dropped by a servant in haste. The seal was broken, The paper crumpled. She shouldn't have read it. It wasn't addressed to her. But the first line caught her eye, and she couldn't stop. Your Grace, the matter we discussed has been arranged. The woman will be dealt with as you requested. No connection to you will be discovered. Payment should be delivered to the usual location. Your servant, Monsieur Viratus, read it twice, her blood turning to ice. The woman. Dealt with. No connection discovered. What woman? What had been arranged? Her mind raced through possibilities, each worse than the last. Honoria was awaiting trial. Had Soren arranged something outside the law? Something violent? He'd seemed so controlled, so committed to proper justice. But what did she really know about him? 6 weeks. She'd known him 6 weeks, and in that time, she'd learned only what he chose to reveal. She heard footsteps approaching and shoved the letter into her pocket, her heart hammering. Viratus. Soren appeared in the hallway, his expression warm. I was looking for you. I thought we might take tea in the garden. The weather is... He stopped, studying her face. What's wrong? Nothing. The lie tasted sour. His eyes narrowed. You're pale. Has something happened? I'm simply tired. Perhaps I'll rest instead of taking tea. She fled before he could question her further, retreating to her apartments and locking the door behind her. The letter burned in her pocket. She wanted to believe there was an innocent explanation, but the words were so deliberate, so careful in their vagueness. Dealt with. No connection discovered. Those weren't the phrases of legitimate business. Had she been a fool? Had she fallen in love with a man whose exterior gentleness concealed something far darker? A knock at her door made her jump. Viratus. Soren's voice was concerned. Something is wrong. Please let me in. I need time alone. A long pause. Very well. But if something has upset you, I wish you would tell me. I cannot fix what I don't understand. She heard his footsteps retreat and pressed her hands to her face. She needed answers, but she couldn't ask Soren directly, not without revealing what she'd found. If he was truly dangerous, confronting him could be catastrophic. There was one other person who might know. One person who had reason to know all of Soren Blackwood's secrets. Drummond, the butler. She found him an hour later in the servants' hall, reviewing household accounts. When she asked to speak privately, his expression betrayed nothing, but he led her to a small sitting room off the main corridor. How may I assist you, Your Grace? I need to ask you about your master. Viratus steadied herself. About the kind of man he truly is. Drummond's face remained impassive. His Grace is an honorable gentleman. Is he? She pulled the letter from her pocket. Then explain this. Drummond read it. His expression shifted subtly before returning to neutral. Your Grace, I cannot discuss His Grace's private correspondence. Cannot or will not? Both. But something in his tone had softened. I will say this. In 23 years of service, I have never known His Grace to harm an innocent person. Whatever you believe that letter suggests, I assure you, you are mistaken. Then what does it mean? Who is the woman being dealt with? Drummond hesitated. That is not my secret to tell, but I urge you to speak with His Grace directly. He deserves the chance to explain. And if the explanation is worse than my fears? It won't be. Drummond met her eyes. His Grace cares for you deeply, Your Grace. More than I've seen him care for anyone. Do not destroy that over a misunderstanding. He bowed and left her alone with more questions than answers. That night, Viratus dreamed of fire. She woke gasping, the smell of smoke still in her nostrils, and realized with horror that it wasn't a dream. Smoke was seeping under her bedroom door. She scrambled from bed, pressing her hand to the wood. Warm. growing warmer. "Fire!" She screamed it as loudly as she could. "Fire in the house!" She heard shouts, running footsteps, the crash of something falling. She wrapped herself in her dressing gown and tried the door handle, hot but not burning. She wrenched it open. The hallway was thick with smoke, but she could see flames at the far end, consuming a tapestry that had hung there for centuries. Servants were already forming a bucket chain, but the fire was spreading fast. "Viratus!" Soren's voice cut through the chaos. He appeared through the smoke, his face soot-streaked and his shirt torn. "Thank God. Come, we have to get out." "How did this start?" "Later. Move." He grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the servants' staircase, away from the flames. They emerged into the garden, coughing, gasping for clean air. Half the household was already outside, watching in horror as flames licked from the upper windows of the east wing. "The library." Viratus's heart clenched. "All your books." "Books can be replaced, and you cannot." Soren's grip on her hand tightened. "Someone set this fire deliberately. One of the servants saw a figure near the east wing just before the flames started. Who would?" She stopped. The answer was obvious. "Honoria. She's been in custody for weeks, but she has allies, people who owe her money or favors." His jaw tightened. "This was meant to kill you. The fire started outside your room." The words hit her like a physical blow. Someone had tried to murder her while she slept. The letter. She reached for her pocket, but her dressing gown had no pockets. The letter was still in her bedroom, probably ash by now. "There was a letter. I found it yesterday. It mentioned dealing with a woman. I thought—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Soren's face went very still. "You thought I had arranged to harm someone." The wording was so vague, and I know so little about you, really. I didn't know what to believe. "So rather than ask me, you spent the day avoiding me, believing I was capable of violence against innocents. I was afraid. The admission cost her. I've learned not to trust. Honoria taught me that everyone lies, everyone manipulates, and everyone has hidden motives. I'm not Honoria. I know that. I know." Tears streamed down her face, mixing with soot. But knowing and believing are different things. 7 years of poison doesn't disappear in 6 weeks. The fire brigade arrived, their shouts and the crash of water on flames filling the night. Servants were crying. Neighbors had gathered to watch. In the chaos, Soren and Viratus stood apart, a gulf of misunderstanding between them. "The letter," Soren said finally, "was about your stepmother's trial. A witness was reluctant to testify. I arranged for her to be relocated to a safe location where Honoria's allies couldn't reach her. Dealt with meant protected. Nothing more." Relief and shame crashed through Viratus in equal measure. "I'm sorry. I should have asked. I should have trusted you." "Yes, you should have." His voice was weary. "But perhaps I should have earned that trust more clearly. I kept secrets. I was vague about my activities. I gave you reasons to doubt. You gave me every reason to believe. I was simply too damaged to see it." He looked at her, really looked, and some of the tension in his face eased. "We are quite a pair, aren't we? A duke who hides everything and a duchess who trusts nothing. Perfectly matched, it seems." Despite everything, despite the fire and the fear and the near-death experience, she saw his lips twitch. "The question is," he said quietly, "can we do better? Can we learn to be honest with each other, even when it's difficult? Even when our instincts tell us to hide?" Viratus stepped closer, taking both his hands in hers. "I want to try. I want to be someone who deserves your trust. I want to be someone who gives trust in return. Even knowing I'll likely fumble it, that I'll keep secrets out of habit and have to learn transparency like a new language? Even then, she rose on her toes and kissed him, soft and desperate, and tasting of smoke. We'll learn together. Behind them, the fire was dying. Ahead of them, something else was just beginning. The weeks following the fire were a trial by fire of a different kind. Honoria's accomplice was caught attempting to flee the city, a disgraced former servant who'd been promised a small fortune to eliminate the woman who'd exposed his former mistress's crimes. He confessed everything, including a plot to have Veratus killed and the evidence of Honoria's embezzlement destroyed in the flames. The trial was swift and brutal. Honoria faced not only charges of fraud and theft, but 2 counts of attempted murder, against her husband through deliberate medical neglect, and against her stepdaughter through the fire. She wept and pleaded and claimed innocence, but the evidence was overwhelming. The jury deliberated for less than an hour. Guilty on all counts. Transportation to the colonies for life. She would never return to England, never again threaten Veratus or anyone else. Veratus sat in the gallery, Soren's hand warm in hers, and watched her stepmother's face as the sentence was pronounced. Honoria's eyes found hers across the courtroom, blazing with hatred and despair. Veratus felt nothing. 7 years of cruelty, and in the end, Honoria had destroyed only herself. Fenella, stripped of her mother's ill-gotten gains and social standing, had quietly relocated to the countryside. Veratus felt no satisfaction in her fall, only the distant relief of knowing she would never have to see either of them again. Afterward, they walked together through the London streets, neither speaking for a long while. The trial had left Veratus feeling hollow, drained of the anger that had sustained her for so long. "It's over," she said finally. "I keep waiting to feel something. Joy, perhaps. Relief. But I just feel empty. You've been fighting for so long. When the battle ends, it takes time to remember how to live without it. Is that what happened to you after your uncle died?" Soren was quiet for several steps. "My uncle was not a kind man. He raised me to be useful, not to be loved. When he died, I felt free for the first time. But I also felt lost. I didn't know who I was without his voice in my head telling me what to do. And now? Now, I know exactly who I am." He stopped walking and turned to face her. "I'm a man who found something unexpected in a cold church on a miserable day. Something I didn't know I was looking for. A wife you didn't ask for? A partner I didn't deserve." He took her hands. "I've spent years building walls, Veratus, keeping people at distance because it was safer, easier. But you walked through every wall I built as if they were made of paper. You made it easy. You let me in even when you were afraid. I'm still afraid." His voice was rough. Terrified, actually. Because what I feel for you is bigger than anything I've felt before. And big things can be lost. They can be broken. They can also endure. She squeezed his hands. They can grow stronger with time. Is that what you want? Time? More time to be certain? Veratus thought about it. She thought about the 6 weeks of discovery, the fire and the fear, the letter and the mistrust. She thought about Drummond's quiet assurance and her father's knowing smile. She thought about breakfasts and libraries and kisses that made her forget everything except the man delivering them. "I don't want more time," she said. "I want forever, starting now." Soren's breath caught. "Veratus, marry me again, properly this time. Not in a cold church with enemies watching, but somewhere beautiful with people who love us. Let me stand beside you and mean every word of the vows. You're proposing to me? Someone had to. You were taking too long." He laughed, that wonderful sound she treasured, and pulled her into his arms, right there on the London street. Passers-by stared. He didn't seem to notice. "Yes," he said against her hair. "Yes, I'll marry you again, as many times as you want. Every year, if you like. Once more will suffice, but make it beautiful. I'll make it the most beautiful wedding England has ever seen." He kissed her, deep and passionate and utterly inappropriate for a public street. Viratus didn't care in the slightest. 3 weeks later, they stood in the gardens of Valmere House, surrounded by flowers and friends, and a father well enough to walk his daughter down the aisle. Viratus wore ivory silk and carried roses from the garden they'd walked together so many times. Soren wore a smile that revealed the man beneath the mask entirely. This time, when they spoke their vows, every word was truth. This time, when he kissed her, it was the beginning of something real. That night, finally sharing a bedroom, Viratus lay in her husband's arms and marveled at the journey that had brought her here. From a servant's corridor, where she'd overheard her own destruction, to this moment of perfect contentment. "What are you thinking?" Soren murmured against her hair. "That I'm grateful to Honoria." He pulled back to stare at her. "Grateful? If she hadn't tried to destroy me, I never would have found you. Her cruelty led me to my happiness." Viratus smiled. "That must infuriate her." "Poetic justice," Soren agreed. "The best kind." She settled back into his arms, listening to his heartbeat, feeling safer and more loved than she'd ever imagined possible. The blind beggar had turned out to be a duke, and the discarded stepdaughter had turned out to be exactly what he needed. 5 years later, the nursery at Valmere House was considerably quieter than it had been an hour ago. Viratus leaned against the doorframe, watching her husband attempt to extricate himself from a pile of sleeping children. Their son Bastian, 4 years old with his father's gray eyes, was sprawled across Soren's chest. Their daughter Margot, 2.5 with her mother's stubborn chin, had wedged herself under his arm, and the baby, 3-month-old Stellan, was nestled in the crook of his other arm, milk-drunk and dreaming. "Help," Soren mouthed silently. Viratus covered her mouth to stifle her laughter. "You got yourself into this, Your Grace." "They ambushed me. It was coordinated. Bastian is 4. I doubt he's capable of military strategy." "You underestimate him." "He's devious." But Soren's face was soft with love as he looked at his children. "Also, I may have promised them a story about a brave knight who rescued a princess from a wicked witch. Let me guess. The knight was a humble beggar in disguise? Something like that." Viratus crossed to them, carefully lifting Margot without waking her. Together, they transferred the children to their beds, a process that took considerable skill and patience. By the time all 3 were settled, the nurse had arrived to keep watch, and they retreated to the hallway. "Your father's letter arrived," Soren said as they walked toward their private sitting room. "He's planning to visit next month. Something about teaching Bastian to fish." "Father teaching anything to anyone? 5 years ago, he could barely lift his head." "5 years ago, your stepmother was slowly killing him. Now he's healthier than men half his age." Soren took her hand. "He credits you, you know. Says your stubbornness saved his life." "Your stubbornness saved his life. I merely provided the motivation. We make an effective team." They settled into their usual chairs by the fire, a ritual that had survived from those early weeks of their accidental marriage. Viratus pulled her feet up beneath her, watching the flames dance. "I received other news today," she said. "From the colonies." Soren's expression grew guarded. "Honoria? She died 3 months ago. Fever, apparently. The letter took time to reach us." Silence fell between them. Viratus waited to feel something, grief or relief or satisfaction. But there was only a quiet sense of closure. "How do you feel?" Soren asked carefully. "Finished. Like a book I never wanted to read has finally ended." She met his eyes. Is that cold of me? She was my father's wife. She raised me after a fashion. She tried to destroy you. She nearly killed your father. She arranged to have you murdered. Soren's voice was gentle but firm. You owe her nothing, Veratus. Not even grief. I keep thinking about what would have happened if her plan had worked. If I'd married an actual beggar. If I'd spent my life in poverty while she enjoyed my inheritance. But that's not what happened. No. Veratus smiled slowly. What happened was considerably more interesting. She rose from her chair and crossed to him, settling herself in his lap with the ease of long familiarity. His arms came around her automatically, holding her close. I fell in love with my husband, she continued, which I understand is rather unfashionable in aristocratic circles. Deeply scandalous, he agreed. We've probably ruined several family reputations. Worth it, he kissed her forehead. Entirely. Through the window, Veratus could see the gardens where they'd married the second time, the roses still blooming despite the late season. Somewhere in the nursery, her children were dreaming. Downstairs, servants moved through rooms that had become as familiar as her own heartbeat. This was her life now. Not the one she'd expected or planned for, but infinitely better than either. A marriage that began as punishment had become her greatest gift. A blind beggar had turned out to be a duke who loved her beyond reason, and a woman who had been invisible for 7 years had become someone who mattered. To her father, to her children, to the man holding her now. No regrets? Soren asked quietly, as if reading her thoughts. Only that I didn't find you sooner. You found me exactly when you were meant to. He tipped her chin up to kiss her properly, and I intend to spend the rest of our lives being grateful for it. Outside, the sun was setting over London, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. Inside, wrapped in her husband's arms, Veratus watched the light fade and felt nothing but peace. Their story had started with cruelty and deception. It ended with love and truth and a happiness she'd never dared to dream. And that, she thought, was the best ending of all. Thank you so much for staying with us until the very end of this incredible journey. If this story touched your heart, made you gasp, or left you believing in unexpected love, please show your support by liking, commenting, subscribing, and sharing it with fellow lovers of romantic tales. Your engagement means everything to us and helps us create more stories like this one.
Stay tuned, because another emotional adventure is waiting for you. Click, listen, and let your heart be swept away once more. From the bottom of our hearts, thank you for being here.